So this week on Next, we're having an extended conversation with Denver Mayor Michael Hancock about the Trump administration, its priorities, your priorities, and how they interface with each other. I'd like to go back to election night because I don't recall ever hearing your answer to the question, what were you thinking the moment you found out that Donald Trump was going to be the next president?
Probably the same thing everyone else was thinking. Wow. This was, and it was kind of a slow, kind of organic, long series of moments leading up to the final epiphany that this was not the expected outcome that we all had. So we had some time to get used to the idea.
Mm-hmm. And were there things that you directed your staff and agencies to do in preparation for a Trump presidency following Election Day, or were you holding back and waiting?
No, I nothing in preparation. I think, when I came back to the office the next day, there was a pall in the office. It was tough getting through the day. In fact, in all the years that I've been mayor, the 5-6 years I've been mayor, I've only left one other time in the middle of the day, due to illness. But that day, about 1 o'clock, I said, I got to go breathe a little bit and kind of collect my thoughts. And I know a lot of other people had similar feelings. We recognized it was going to be a new day, and we had to reset and figure it all out. Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. That was perfect timing, actually. So you described folks being upset in the office. Do you have any Republicans who work for you?
Yes.
Okay.
At the time, Janice Sinden was the chief of staff. Well, she had just left, and Janice is a Republican. But we have several other Republicans who work here.
So the president likes to describe himself as a deal maker, somebody who can get things done. Do you want to make deals with him?
We're going to have to make deals with him. I mean, he is the President of the United States. And the reality is we need to stop talking about the election and get on to making sure that this country runs smoothly.
So if you want to get in touch with him, I assume just through shared friends and contacts, you had a pipeline to President Obama in the White House.
Right.
Do you have a pipeline to the Trump White House?
Not yet. The reality is I was just in Washington with other mayors, and we started the process of meeting with secretaries and meeting members of the Trump administration. The reality is that it's going to take a while. He still has a lot of staff he has to bring on. His team is not complete, and so he's going to have to take time to build it, and we're going to have to take time to, when it happens, to get to know who the players are there.
Mm-hmm. I assume you want to be able to pick up the phone and
absolutely,
reach the White House.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have to be able to communicate with the White House for a variety of reasons, but certainly when it comes to the health, safety, and well-being of our citizens, it's important that we'll be able to communicate with the White House.
President Trump appears to have a pretty dim view of America's cities. In his inaugural, he talked about American carnage, describing cities as crime-ridden and dangerous and in decay. He's made some fairly prominent false statements about violent crime being at the highest levels in decades. Why do you think he's pushing that narrative about cities?
You know what? I can't comment on why or what the motives are for the president. But I can tell you this, that I know the mayors that I work with, regardless of their party affiliation, believe that their highest responsibility, greatest responsibility, is the health, safety, and well-being of every citizen that lives in their city. And I, every day think about the safety of the people who live in this city and recognize that we'll do everything we can to promote the safety and make sure our police officers are well equipped and prepared to serve and protect the people of this great city of ours. I feel for Mayor Emanuel, for example, in Chicago, going through the situation he's going through. If there ever was an idea that I had to share with him, I would. And I think that's the highest, greatest value that the President of the United States or anyone who's serving in these jobs can give someone who's going through that. Not criticism, not staining them with some kind of a tagline or provocative statement, but simply saying, how can I help? What can we do to bring an end to this senseless loss of life in your city? And I know that's what Mayor Emanuel would expect and hope for, and that's what I would expect and hope for as mayor of the city of Denver.
Do you think President Trump wants cities to be better off?
Does he want what?
Cities to be better off.
Well, I certainly hope so. I hope the president wants the cities to be better off economically, socially, culturally, certainly safety-wise. I think it's extremely important that people feel safe in their cities.
Do you hear racial overtones when he criticizes cities and talks about them as dangerous places that his voters don't want to be?
You know, what I feel is a very non-constructive verbiage. What we need is the words from the president say, we're here to help. No threats, but simply saying, how can we be helpful as a nation? Because those are our citizens as well, to come and to help end the senseless violence in the city of Chicago and wherever else it's occurring.
As we sit down for this discussion on Monday, President Trump is preparing to roll out a scaled-back executive order, refugee ban, travel restrictions. We talked about your concerns with the initial order that was struck down by the courts. Do you have a higher opinion of this second order?
I've only received kind of a general briefing on it. I was not able to read the order when it came out this morning. I will by this afternoon. But I will tell you that I certainly hope that how they roll this out and how they explain the executive order and how it's going to work this time around will be much more constructive and helpful to the cities, as well as to the people who may be targeted under this executive order. As you know, there was a lot of confusion, a lot of pain, a lot of fear that resulted from the first executive order. Unnecessary. We have to be more thoughtful, and we have to think about the people who live in our cities, who are traveling. They could be students, they could be on work visas. I think those individuals deserve to know how these executive orders will impact them, and particularly their sense of belonging and sense of security.
Last time we talked, I asked you this question, and I'm not sure that I heard a clear answer. Is it your belief that Denver would be worse off as a city without the people who are here illegally?
Oh, absolutely not. Listen, the first thing that we think about, again, I think about every day, is the safety and well-being of our city and everyone who lives here. The second thing we think about is this city is great because of the diversity of this city and how we have been fundamentally able to be an inclusive city, welcoming city. Those things are the hallmarks and the true values of who we are. Our economic security is tied up into the productivity of everyone who lives here and works here.
Legally or illegally?
Legally or illegally. And the reality is that we have a broken immigration system. We have 11 million people here, and we must be careful how we deal with individuals under this broken system, because we're going to end up hurting them more than we do helping them, and certainly hurting ourselves more than we do helping ourselves under the system.
One thing I think we in the media have a responsibility to point out is the people who are here illegally commit crimes at a lesser rate than native-born Americans. But the fact is the people who are here illegally, even people who have been flagged for deportation, do commit crime. And most recently there was the case of Ever Vias, who's a suspected gang member who's wanted for deportation. He was in and out of the Denver jail before he was allegedly involved in a murder at a light rail station. And immigration agents had asked for a heads up before his release so that they could take him into custody if they wanted. And the Denver Sheriff's Office gave them 26 minutes notice a little bit before midnight. Was that sufficient?
You know what, we have taken a look at that system. We've sat down with ICE and kind of evaluated, analyzed it. Can we do better in terms of the amount of time they get? Absolutely. Can we improve? I'm sorry?
What's fair,
time-wise? You know, whether or not, what's fair is really something that ICE has to determine. But our sheriffs are dealing with tens and dozens of people every day going in and out of that system. We did fax the facsimile over to them to notify them. For whatever reason, it was not received, or at least not noticed early enough. But listen, there is accountability on both sides of this. The idea is that we had to sit down with the ICE and say, what happened here? How do we improve these processes so that you get enough notice or time in your notification so you can act? But the reality is they knew where he was all along in our system. They could have issued a warrant, they didn't, which would have allowed us to detain him longer. But it's unfortunate, and my hearts and thoughts and prayers go to the Cruz family. But the reality is that we have a process we're trying to follow. Can we tighten it up? We can and we will.
The Cruz family told us that they're livid with how the city handled this. Have you reached out to them?
I have not reached out to them.
Okay, is that something you anticipate doing?
You know what, had not quite frankly thought about it, but because so many things are moving so quickly, we had to better understand what happened here before I sit down with any family. I want to know exactly what happened here. So probably will reach out to them and have a conversation now that we have a better idea as of last week what truly went on, and had conversation with ICE and how we can do a better job going forward. So
I understand that you had a conversation with ICE. Have you ordered any concrete changes in policy or procedure?
One is we've asked ICE, for example, can we do something other than faxing? I mean, it's a very archaic way.
That seems nuts to me that we're doing it by fax.
We're doing it, but they prefer that.
Okay.
Now we know what they prefer. And between our sheriff's department and the ICE agents, We're going to continue to fax that information to them, and we're going to try to give them adequate enough notice.
State Senator John Cook, who used to be the Weld County Sheriff, looked at the case and said that the 26-minute heads up appeared to be passive-aggressive to him. Like, these are two feuding agencies, Denver Sheriff and ICE. Have you instructed anybody in your administration to be less than fully cooperative with ICE?
Absolutely not. Let me be very clear, and I want to be very, very clear about this. We do not shield criminals. Our number one responsibility to the people of this city is, again, the safety of the people who live here. No one has ever received a direct order from me, a city attorney, to shield criminals or to be less than cooperative with ICE. We follow the law, and we can only detain individuals up to the time that we are told time to release them. And that's what we do, and we'll do our best to tighten up those processes. Again, this is one situation. Unfortunately, it turned tragic, but we've got dozens of these that come through, and we'll do everything we can to maintain the safety of the residents of the city, always, from day one.
One thing I hear a lot from viewers is the mayor is embracing the term sanctuary city. You've recently said, if that reflects our values and how we treat people in an inclusive manner, then call us a sanctuary city. They draw a straight line from that to Evervias walking out of jail with the availability to commit a murder. Why is that not fair?
I think the reality is that people who want to find an excuse to support their position, Evervias gave them the excuse to do that, opened the door for them. All it takes is one. Again, this is unfortunate. It is a sad situation in reality in terms of crime in our cities. This city doesn't want criminals on our streets, walking our streets by, any title, whether they're immigrant or not. And the reality is that we're going to do everything we can to protect individuals. We have never gone through the process of determining, that term that people want us to determine. But our values speak for us. Our actions speak for us. But it doesn't mean that we harbor criminals or protect criminals in the city. We don't do it. We will not do it. We don't want citizens walking around who are criminals any more than we want immigrants walking around our streets who are criminals.
Last question on immigration. The city has defended Jeanette Vizquera and her right to stay in this country, or defended her ability to stay in the country. She's taken sanctuary in a church. She has a criminal conviction. You put her in a separate class of people with criminal convictions than somebody like an Evervias.
Ms. Vizquera cooperated in a criminal investigation, and we issued a visa to her, which was never given proper hearing. It's unfortunate. As a city, we have said this is someone who has been here, raising her family, who cooperated in a criminal matter, and we believe that she should be allowed to stay in the city of Denver.
Outweighs her conviction in your mind?
Well, the reality is we do believe that you adjudicate that, you deal with that, but the reality is she a threat to anyone. The reality is she is, worked with the city of Denver, she worked with our criminal justice system. This is about a humane approach to an individual who's been here, her children are here, and we're talking about removing her from her children and ripping her away from her children. We can do better than that, and I think that as a system, we could have handled this situation in a much better way. And it's unfortunate that she has to harbor herself in the basement of a church, when as a system we could have done a much better job of, quite frankly, executing the visa and allowing for the adjudication of her matters.
I want to touch on a couple of other topics. You were in Washington last week, a meeting of leaders from the U.S. Council of Mayors. You had a chance for a face-to-face discussion with Education Secretary Betsy DeVos.
Yes.
She's been a really polarizing figure, subject of a lot of mockery from the left. Based on your interactions with her, does she not grasp the way that the education system works, or do you just have disagreements with her about how education should work?
You know what, listen, in meeting with her, first of all, it's going to take a while for her to kind of settle in and kind of understand what she can do and what she cannot do, what she knows and what she doesn't know. And I think that's a fair assessment of anyone who walks into the enormity of those offices. That's the first impression. I asked her about her vision, and just like anyone who's been in an office of that magnitude for a couple of weeks, she answered the question just as I expected. There were a lot of things in there. She has to really nail it down, but that will come with time. But I'll tell you, she answered a question similar to how I would answer it, that she believes in quality education being accessible to all children regardless of their zip code, where they live. And she doesn't really care how it's delivered, whether it's a charter school or a traditional school or an innovation school. But make sure that young people and their families have options. And we really should have zero tolerance for those type of systems that only offer our families one option in terms of the type of education or opportunities in education they receive. But I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. She needs time to settle in and try to understand the lay of the land.
Later this week, the Trump administration is expected to begin a rollback of some environmental policies that President Obama set into motion. One of them was a requirement on automobile manufacturers to move towards electric and highly efficient cars, and the industry said, we cannot meet this mandate, it's crushing us with costs and so forth. I'm curious how you think the expected rollback of these emission standards is going to impact Denver's plans to move towards a clean car, driverless car, electric car future.
There are very few priorities today in the city of Denver than to become more sustainable and to continue our efforts toward breathing cleaner air, protecting our water system so that we have clean water, and making sure that we live a more energy efficient, more sustainable future going forward. I grew up in the city, and I remember the brown cloud, Kyle. I remember very clearly as a kid looking up and seeing the brown cloud. Through the EPA and great leadership of mayors who've come through here and city council members who've made difficult decisions, today we don't have the brown cloud. We're breathing cleaner air. And the city has made commitments toward reducing our CO2 emissions in half, or 80% by 2050. We're going to remain committed to that because it's for not only what we are doing today to live a more sustainable and cleaner lifestyle, but for our future, quite frankly. And so, yes, it's important that the EPA still have the tools and the ability to execute sustainable policies so that we can all live better and breathe cleaner air. But it's also important for cities like Denver to maintain its commitment toward the standards that were established in partnership with the Obama administration going forward. And we'll do that here in Denver.
I want to conclude our conversation in the minutes remaining talking about legal recreational marijuana and what the Trump administration is going to do on that. Very broadly speaking, do you think that legal recreational marijuana is a benefit to this city?
It certainly has been beneficial, and I can tell you also it has, through partnership with the industry, been rolled out in a very responsible manner and, quite frankly, become the model for the rest of the world. I mean, we receive requests from all over the world on how Denver did what it has done. But most people want to go straight to the taxing revenue that is received. But I think it's been a very responsible rollout on a system that I believe, quite frankly, is going to become legal across this nation and still believe it will be in the next decade.
We're getting conflicting signals on whether the Trump administration is actually going to move on legal recreational marijuana. What's the best intelligence you have on that?
I think they're going to move, I think you're going to see them move to kind of regulate it a little more and to put their, what I like to say, their imprint on it.
What does that look like?
Well, I think through the regulations and through how states and cities seek approval or partnership with the federal government in legalizing recreational marijuana, or maybe even medical marijuana for that matter. But the reality is this: it's moving so swiftly across this country. And one of the reasons why they may be more cautious than to come in with blunt force is that more states have already moved to legalize recreational marijuana. The people of Colorado have spoken. The people of many other states have spoken. I think it's what, 34 now have spoken about the desire to legalize medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. It would behoove the federal government to put in systems to kind of allow for the system to move forward. And this comes from a guy who opposed it initially. We need banking regulations that allows for people to bank properly who own these businesses. And we need to make sure that the framework of regulation and enforcement are properly set up so we can protect our children, protect our communities, and make sure we responsibly implement legalized marijuana policies.
You're among a number of elected leaders in Colorado who were initially hesitant about it and are now defending our system. One could look at that and say, here are pragmatic politicians that are willing to give the people what they want and implement the best system, or you could look at it and say, anything for a buck, and there's a lot of bucks tied to legal marijuana. Sure. It's more than a money thing. Absolutely, and you can research my statements when I pose it. Not all tax revenue is good tax revenue. It was never about money for me. The reality is this is about a system that the people have said they want. And they have spoken loudly and clearly here in Denver and in the state of Colorado. And now my constitutional responsibility is to implement that policy in a very responsible manner.
which we've done. And I'm proud of this city, I'm proud of the state of Colorado, and I'm proud of the industry, quite frankly, who've done a good job in partnering. Had it not been for their willingness to cooperate and collaborate in setting up the regulatory and enforcement framework, I don't think we'd be here today talking about the way we have. But they've been very responsible and accountable. They are men and women, just like you and I, who have put their hard-earned money, many of them put their retirement money up to do this, and it's working for them. And they've been responsible. They don't want to go bad any more than you and I do. And so, again, I think it behooves the federal government to find a way, how do we help be a partner with the cities and the states to make this a very responsible system.
You've been generous with your time. I want to be respectful of it. Final 30 seconds. I assume you haven't had a face-to-face conversation with President Trump.
No.
If you have that opportunity, you have 30 seconds to your elevator speech. What is the issue that you want to bring to his attention? What's your pitch to him in those 30 seconds?
Well, I think the first one would be immigration. That the reality is we have a system that's broken. We're going to end up hurting people more than we help them. Our number one responsibility in our states and cities is the safety and well-being of all of our residents. We don't want to shield criminals any more than you want to shield criminals. Let's sit down and work together on a system that makes more sense, that is practical with regards to our economic security and to the value systems that are, I believe, embedded in our cities and our states, to be open and inclusive, to make sure that we harness that intellectual opportunity with our immigrants, and that we harness the contributions they want to bring to our city, because they matter. And we can do better. We're not going to deport 11 million people. But what we can do is to take those 11 million people and say, you must become part of the production and productivity of this great nation of ours. And there's only one way to do that. And let's design that way so that families are not needlessly ripped or torn apart, and that our cities don't live in, or people who live in our cities are not living in fear. And that people who are set to testify in court proceedings show up, instead of having 4 of them step out and refuse to show up like we're seeing here in Denver. We're a much better city than that. We're a much better nation than that. Those are the ideas I believe in, and those are ideas I believe most Americans believe in.
Mayor Hancock, thank you for your time.
Thank you as well.
Appreciate it very much. Yep, thank you for having us.
Appreciate it, as always.